ourselves as we do our part. I'm Julianne Sturmer. I'm a ruling elder from Central in Eugene, and I really thank you for electing me to be among this group. I won't say what Kay just said, that it changed my life, but it's coming pretty darn near. So I'm just here to do the first little bit of an intro. It's hard to choose 2 to 3 minutes worth of information on an event that my husband called grueling, but I called inspiring. I'm going to be reading from a pastoral letter that was sent out by our new co-moderators and our new stated clerk, as well as Tony De La Rosa, who's the interim director of Presbyterian Mission Agency, and I served on that committee, mission coordination. So I appreciated the points that he included in the pastoral letter, but I won't read the whole thing. You can reference that online if you like. But they do start by saying, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And we know that that's from Ecclesiastes 3. I like that as kind of a guiding scriptural snippet as I really looked at this season of change. And I truly believe that that's what went on at GA in June. They say, brothers and sisters in Christ, there is a new season in the Presbyterian Church USA, as witnessed by the actions of the 222nd General Assembly, the body of 594 commissioners who gathered in Portland, elected co-moderators for the first time. Those co-moderators are Denise Anderson and Jan Edmiston. And at the same meeting, of course, J. Herbert Nelson was elected as the new stated clerk, and both of these elections were historic and both signal a new way for our church. The business decisions made by the body also were transformative for the 1,572,660 members that we are, and the 9,642 churches of the PCUSA. That work wasn't easy, and it involved careful deliberations. Collectively, the body acted on nearly 100 overtures by discerning the will of Christ. That was awesome to me, just the breadth and depth of our discernment and our coming to know. A little bit more about the elections. We do have co-moderators. Moderators chair the meeting of the GA Assembly and help lead the church until GA occurs again in 2 years. A change to the standing rules at the last General Assembly permitted candidates to stand for moderator as either traditional moderator-vice moderator team or as co-moderators. Both teams up for election chose the co-moderator route this year, and the Reverend Jan Edmiston and the Reverend Denise Anderson were elected on the first ballot with 76% of the vote. We look forward to working with them over the next couple years and following. And a word about the new stated clerk. With the term of the former stated clerk, Reverend Grady Parsons, finishing his term, and then he elected not to stand again for re-election. The General Assembly did elect Reverend J. Herbert Nelson, who was challenged by Reverend David Baker from Florida. Reverend Nelson was elected by 80% of the vote on the first ballot. I am impressed by the fact that Reverend J. Herbert Nelson is a third-generation Presbyterian minister and is carrying on his ministry as stated clerk leader of our PCUSA. I think that's what I'll have to say. Our young adult delegate, Leah Olson, couldn't be here this weekend, but I think Jennifer is going to fill in a little bit on the young adult news.
Imagine I'm a few decades younger. I was asked to do this because once, many, many moons ago, I got to be a young adult advisory delegate, and it was an amazing experience. It was fun to be on the opposite side of that this time and being a grown-up commissioner. But I have to tell you that our YADs are amazing. We also have, there are lots of kinds of advisory delegates. There are MADs, which are mission advisory delegates, which Hugh Anderson was one of those. You can ask him about that experience. There are TSADs, which are theological seminary advisory delegates. They are there to represent our various schools. And then there are the young adult advisory delegates. We had Leah Olson from the Tualatin Church, and she was great. Our days were long and hard. We often began meetings around 8 and were there until they were about to shut the MAX down, and so we all had to go home. And after that, the YADs had another meeting where they were briefed on what was coming up so that they could advise us. They had really long days, but they also had a lot of fun. And I have to say, any of you who have concerns or worries about where our church is now and where it is going, I wish you all could have seen the YADs at work. To a person, every one of us was inspired by the words that these young adults had to share. In our committees, they have voice and vote. On the floor of the assembly during the plenary, they have an advisory vote to advise us before we take the commissioner's vote. In our committees, many of them spoke eloquently about a variety of concerns, and on the floor of the plenary they did as well. So they are good news. Is that fair? Yeah.
I'm Brian Heron. I'm teaching elder at Bethany Presbyterian Church, obviously Presbyterian, in Grants Pass, and the particular committee that I was assigned to was the Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Committee. And I just want to share a couple of things about that committee. One is I really felt like I had probably the easiest committee, but also the most celebrated at the same time. There was very little that was controversial in that particular committee, but the one thing that we had on our docket was the Belhar Confession. And that was, for me, probably the most moving part of the General Assembly. One of the things that occurred to me is that I thought about my experience in the local church with regard to the Book of Confessions, and I think about the experience that I have almost every year when we get ready to ordain new elders, and we have the questions for them, and we talk about, will you abide by the Book of Confessions? And generally, I either get a question of what is the Book of Confessions, or that glazed look, but certainly willing to answer the question anyway. And so there's that sense that, in some ways, the Book of Confessions isn't front and center in our local churches. And so we're getting ready to confirm and add to our Book of Confessions this Belhar Confession. And in the committee, I was really supportive and enjoyed the process, but it wasn't until we got to the floor that the impact really hit me. It was approved very highly. I think it was 90 or so percent on the floor of the General Assembly. And all that we were really doing was confirming what the at least 2/3 of the presbyteries had already voted in the prior year. And the thing that really moved me is that once we had confirmed it, 2 of the speakers who spoke right after confirmation were part of the writing of the Belhar Confession in South Africa. And the first one got up and spoke and said, one of the things that you folks need to know is that in South Africa we're a few hours off in terms of time, and that many of the South African Christians had got up in the wee hours of the morning to watch the live streaming of our particular deliberation and vote on that, and that when we passed it, they both wept and cheered. And that moment for me, just my whole body, my body shivered. And there was that sense that, wow, this stuff really matters. This stuff makes a difference. And there are people who put their lives on the line for these confessions, especially when you think about apartheid in South Africa, and then for us to adopt it in our own context. And so it made, for me, the Book of Confessions really come alive. I memorized the Shorter Catechism in seminary, and that had its own impact, but to have this was very meaningful. The other thing that happened that I think is important for our Northwest context especially is that we also approved a self-study of our ecumenical and interfaith relations. And the one part of this that was really interesting for me is that they are asking some new questions about what does it mean to be ecumenical and to be in conversation and have partnerships both locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. And one of the important questions that they're asking is, what does it mean to be in partnership with those who call themselves spiritual but not religious, or people who say that they're none when it comes to religious affiliation? And at this point in the document, they're only asking the question saying, we know we need to be in conversation, but we have no idea yet how to do that. It's not like you can contact the executive director of the national affiliation of those who are nuns. So it's a very loose organization of people. But they are asking the question saying, we know, like in the Northwest, 36% of the folks call themselves nuns or spiritual but not religious. And we know that's part of our future, and we're trying to figure out now how to be in conversation with them.
And by nuns, you mean N-O-N-E.
So I'm Dave Hutchinson, and I'm a teaching elder from St. Helens. And when I first became a commissioner, there was a question rumbling around in my mind, which is something like, is God still in the church? What with, concerns about the denominational decline and conflicts around the world and within, and does the church really make a difference? Do we have a voice anymore? I wondered, right? Then I was assigned to the Middle East Issues Committee, and I thought, great. Now, how does anybody do anything about that, really, right? What's the answer to that conflict? So I thought, well, I'll tough it out. I'll put in my week, and I'll go back to St. Helens, whatever. And then I realized I had the wrong question. It's not about, is God still in it? It's about how is God still in it, and where is God still in it? And that question emerged for me out of General Assembly and a conversation I had there. To reframe everything, God's Spirit at work, which is the heart of my experience of the Assembly. My committee work was redemptive. It brought overtures to the floor of General Assembly that tried to do two things, both to advocate strongly for justice for Palestinian people who've suffered terrible violence, and to stay connected to our allies in the American Jewish community, and to try to do both of those things. The next 2 years for Presbyterians will be devoted largely to study and listening on all sides, while still advocating to end violence now. And I think the overtures from the Middle East Committee reflect that, and as how they passed the General Assembly. It was a remarkable thing that spirit around these issues followed the assemblies of 14 and 12 in Detroit and Pittsburgh, where it was far more contentious. But we continue to move forward, and I believe truly God is in this with us as we seek to do justice and healing, to try to both listen and act, and to have a voice. And that happened for me, and the committee work itself and the relationships formed and the connections made were there. God was in that. God was also present for me in the worship experience, the music, the variety of styles, so that everybody found themselves somewhere in that room. The music of combined choirs and the bell choir, and then at the closing worship, that Korean choir following two overtures on reconciliation in Korea, and I had the opportunity to be bring a commissioner resolution on one of them. And as Brian said, Belhar and the whole reconciliation theme that followed through the whole thing, God's Spirit, there was something about this assembly, at least for me. I heard God in the preaching. Alice Ridgill was incredible. If you want to hear probably one of the best sermons you'll ever hear, look up Alice Ridgill. You can find it on the internet. And by the way, the platform's Vimeo. It's not YouTube, but it's also on the GA website, which if you can find it, it's there too. I heard God present in it with us as the youth. The youth team from Cascades Youth Team led a liturgy of confession and renewal, acknowledging our turning away and turning back towards God. And all of these things were profoundly moving to me. And so I thank you for the opportunity to renew my faith as a commissioner of General Assembly.
I am Denise McPherson, a ruling elder from Community Presbyterian Church of Walport. And I was your commissioner to the Social Justice Committee. There were 20 overtures and 5 advocacy committee reports to the Social Justice Committee. We started with what our moderator, Patricia Tull, understood to be the easiest overtures and worked towards the harder, more complicated, contentious issues. I know you'd like to hear about your overture you submitted on choosing to be a church committed to the gospel of Matthew 25, so I will start with that. Of the 25 agenda items we reviewed, yours came in at number 21. Your overture was discussed with 2 overtures from Presbytery of the Foothills. They recommended setting aside forming any social policy for the next 3 General Assemblies and requiring 1/3 of presbyteries' concurrence on any social witness resolutions. Both of these were answered by the recommendation of your overture. Overture advocates June Carlson, our new moderator from Presbytery of the Cascades, and others from 5 concurring presbyteries spoke eloquently, saying, "We must keep awake. We serve God by serving the least, lost, and last. Our relationship with one another allows the Holy Spirit to move through the church." And June reminded us it took less than 10 years for 6 million Jews to be killed. Your overture was unanimously approved in committee and by voice vote at the large plenary session. 7 of the overtures dealt with grace. 7 of the overtures dealt with race. Their titles were Facing Racism, Dismantling Racism, Creating Cultural Proficiency, A New Civil Rights Movement, Resources for Learning, Reflection, and Reconciliation with Committees of Color, and a church-wide conversation on race with a review of the doctrine of discovery. 4 overtures on campaign finance, human trafficking, and the church's urban vision seeking to end the war on drugs were continuations from previous General Assemblies, where we approved reports and studies with ongoing work recommended for the 2018 GA. 2 overtures dealt with the LGBTQ/Q issue. It was voted in committee and plenary to disapprove therapies purporting to change sexual orientation or gender identity. Also, an alternative resolution from ASWAP, which is the Advocacy Committee for Social Witness Policy, all these acronyms. It resolves to continue the journey as a denomination to become more open, understanding, and accepting of our LGBTQ/Q family, and expresses deep sorrow for all individuals and congregations who have left our fellowship, and acknowledges our sincere appreciation for those who have maintained relationship despite profound disagreement. We approved overtures on creating a certificate program to better serve those living with HIV/AIDS, sending Congress a request to find a long-term debt plan for Puerto Rico's financial crisis. We acknowledged 80 years of the church's social witness body, and we apologize to Native Americans, Native Alaskans, and Native Hawaiians who were part of stolen generations during the Indian assimilation movement. So it was a busy time. Thank you.
So I served on the Committee on Polity and Ordered Ministries, and when I would tell people that, they would go, "Oh," unless they were a clerk of session or a stated clerk, and then they would go, "Oh." And so that was kind of an interesting thing. I think you might think it was boring. We were mostly looking at things that would change the Book of Order, but it was not boring. It was really rather interesting. I was asked to highlight a couple of those things for you. But before I get to our committee, there were 2 other things I was asked to lift up that our folks weren't on those committees, but that were things that we were concerned about. One was the taking our money out of supporting fossil fuels, which there had been some advocacy for from this region. An alternative, a substitute motion from a minority report, it was what was eventually approved, and you can read more about that in detail online, but the general consensus was that it was important for us to stay in conversation, kind of more of a middle way. There were some people who were a little bit frustrated by the process, maybe more than the outcome, but that's where we landed. I'm sure that that will be an ongoing conversation. There were still a lot of people very passionate about that at the Assembly. Another piece that we didn't have folks on the committee, but that is important, is a group called The Way Forward. We're not the only ones trying to figure out what the future needs to look like in terms of staffing, turns out. There are people who are wondering if maybe the Office of General Assembly and the Presbyterian Mission Agency need to merge, or what other changes might need to happen at the national level. And so there was a committee that spent all week thinking about that. And so they ended up bringing before the plenary one thing that was called a vision for 2020. So we'll have 2020 vision in the Presbyterian Church. Aren't we clever with our acronyms? So that we could kind of have a vision going forward, and at the same time have a task force to look at staffing and whether or not the merging makes sense. So they're working on it right now. Your prayers are appreciated. In our polity group, Dave is going to address some of the General Assembly things that are coming out that you'll be voting on in the next few months for changes to the Book of Order, but there were a couple of things that I wanted to let you know about. The one we spent the most amount of time on, at the last General Assembly, you might remember there was a piece of, there was an overture that changed some language saying that if a pastor renounced jurisdiction during a disciplinary process, they could no longer work or volunteer for a church, period, the end, forever, amen. And that passed and went around and got approved by the presbyteries and is now part of our Book of Order. And there are some folks who are concerned that that does not fit in, the sort of finality of that doesn't fit in with most of our disciplinary processes that have some sort of way of establishing some sort of reconciliation and redemption. And so there were 3 different overtures on that front. One was to strike it altogether. One was to say, unless or until they become a member of a church, at which point they would again be under jurisdiction. And the third was a more detailed outline of a process. As you can imagine, it was a long and painful day. This grew out of situations of sexual misconduct with young people in our church. So we heard a lot of really painful testimony. And as hard as that was for all of us on our committee, we were proud that we're a part of a church that's dealing with this and not sweeping it under the rug, and that's trying to be faithful in how we respond. In the end, after much discussion, one recommendation came before the plenary, but a substitute motion came forth to lift up the thing that had been voted on in our committee. It was a lot of back and forth. The end result is that there is a process. It's an amended version of the longer process that was brought forth in one of the overtures. And so you'll be seeing that in the months to come. It'll be something that we'll be voting on as to whether or not we think this is the process that needs to be added to our Book of Order or not. So that's something that will be coming forward. And then another piece to let you know about, you might be aware that over the last few years, the form of government was revamped and streamlined. And you might be aware that coming out of this General Assembly, the piece that deals with worship has been revamped, and we'll be voting on that. And so our committee said, hey, maybe we should do the same with the Book of Discipline. There's some confusing stuff in there. There was an overture recommending that, and we approved it. So there's a task force now that will go forth and look into making the Book of Discipline clearer so that our entire Book of Order is hopefully more concise.
Hi, I'm Dave Dunford, ruling elder at Covenant and also clerk of session, which will explain sort of what I'm going to be talking about, which is the Book of Order, which I'm sure you all couldn't wait to hear about now. Thank you for sticking around. Before I get to that, I served on the Peacemaking and International Issues Committee. I find it was one of the smaller committees, 48 delegates, or actually all commissioners and delegates. Our issue, we only had 11 issues to deal with. We passed them all. It was really not non-contentious. just a quick sample. One was regarding in the Korean War, U.S. soldiers had killed Korean citizens near a town called Nogunri, and the resolution was to contact the Korean Presbyterian churches and also contact our president to work with the government and the churches to acknowledge what happened. For many years that did not get acknowledged, and to possibly some reconciliation between the two countries and maybe the soldiers and survivors. Another Korean one was actually a commissioner's resolution, which two commissioners get together and present it, and that was to encourage the United States to get involved, and also the two Korean countries for reunification of the Korean Peninsula. We dealt with Cuba, with peacemaking there, with the relaxation of, I'm trying to think of the right word I want, but market relations just in general. And to basically, the church contact both countries to go smoothly, and also to work with the Presbyterian Church in Cuba and how we can help them help grow and get more ruling elders in their churches. So most of it was like reconciliation, peacemaking, and trying to get entities together. Now, what you've really been waiting for, the Book of Order. There were about 28 issues, overtures that would affect amended items in the Book of Order. Of those, 13 were disapproved, which means they will not come to the presbyteries for vote. A couple of them, which just highlight to mention, well, one was virtual attendance in session meetings, in other words, like Skype or other ways. That was disapproved because we are allowed to do it now by the Robert's Rules of Orders. One presbytery of the Foothills in South Carolina were Busy Beavers. They had about 6 overtures regarding, for example, requiring 2/3 vote to amend the Book of Order, where right now it's only a majority. Permitting presbyteries to abstain from voting on constitutional changes, and require 2/3 of a vote of consenting or concurring presbyteries on an overture. So when an overture is made by a presbytery, right now you just need one more concurring presbytery for it to go on the docket. This one would require 2/3 of all the presbyteries to concur before it would go on the docket. All those were disapproved. Another one was the same-sex marriage, to take it back to where a ruling elder could not perform a same-sex marriage. That was defeated, so it stays as it is right now. 2 were referred to various agencies. One was ruling elder defined. That was referred to the Committee on the General Assembly to look at and possibly bring up at the next General Assembly. Another one was to extend time limits on abuse reporting in instances of gross negligence. That was referred to the Office of the General Assembly to develop and recommend language. Then there were approximately 13 that were approved, and these we'll probably start seeing some of these in November, for the presbyteries to vote on to be confirmed in 2018 in St. Louis. I'll just mention what the titles are. I won't get into a whole lot, but maybe what a rough idea of what it is. One is requiring all councils to adopt dependent care policies. This is on top of our child abuse and sexual abuse. An authoritative interpretation concerning non-geographic presbyteries. That was brought by Eastern Korean Presbytery, and that deals with either Indian or the Koreans who don't have a geographical presbytery as to what presbytery they'd be in, even though they're not geographically located there. Those came out of the Mid-Council Committee. Then out of the church polity, which, Jennifer said, oh, yay, and be clerk of session, I'm going, oh, yay. So I guess that's just my clerkiness there. One is parity in committees of councils above the session, be synod and anything with GA regarding ruling elders and teaching elders. Clarify titles of ordered ministry, and that's the one you're going to vote on. Do we change teaching elders back to minister of word and sacrament? Yep. So that issue hasn't gone in yet, so we're not sure what to call the teaching elders now. Elders still rule. Yeah, ruling, I guess they'll do that next one. Ruling elders is still there. So I guess you're a minister of teaching elders or whatever. And then as Jennifer noted, a task force has been commissioned to look into revising the rules of discipline. We won't vote on that, but that was something that'll be coming up. Amend forms of certified church service and approve national certifying bodies. From the Immigration and Environmental Issues Committee, the one we concurred with was calling for God's creation to be added in the Book of Order under the Ministry of Members. That was approved, so that will be coming for presbytery vote. Under theological issues and institutions, one was adding language to who can access the Lord's Supper. And one more is, Jennifer already mentioned that, revising the directory of worship. Where that's different is now you will be voting on accepting the revisions that are presented, and if approved, it'll be confirmed in 2 years, whereas the directory of discipline, rules of discipline, that overture would be brought up next General Assembly and then voted on in 2019. And so, again, about 13 items we'll have to vote on over the course of the year for the Book of Order. And regarding, just from my experience, just a little quirky bent here, it was interesting to see like Robert's Rules of Orders and how that actually worked. And your motions, your amendments to your motion, your substitute motions, and we're perfecting this and perfecting that. It was good. And one thing also impressed me is even in committee and in plenary, whether it be commissioner or YAD or other delegates, there were some, you could tell, strong feelings, but everybody was respectful of other people, and there wasn't any shouting, and it was well organized, and it was a great experience. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just one little quick shout out to Paul. Our clerk is awesome, and we are so grateful. He supported us all the way through that thing. He asked us at the beginning what snacks we wanted, and we each told him what we kind of wanted. And that once you start asking people what they want, beware. But it wasn't just a pile of stuff. Each person got what they asked for, and he kept being there for us. So he's a great clerk, supportive. He was helpful with the process and getting us ready and training and everything. Awesome.
I would just say that Paul's nurturing also included Play-Doh and Slinkies, which was good. on request. I just want to close with one statement from J. Herbert Nelson, our new stated clerk. We are not dead. We are alive, and we are reforming, and we are transforming this world, one person at a time. And I would just say amen to that.